The slap landed before I even saw her hand rise. My glasses shot off my face and skittered across the polished floor of the Hillcrest ballroom as 150 guests fell quiet in the same breath. Heat flared along my cheekbone, but the deeper sting was the one that settled in my chest. Slow and heavy, as if shame had weight. Vanessa stood inches from me in her wedding gown, chest heaving, bouquet trembling in her fingers. "Give me the house keys." "Eleanor, a woman your age does not need that much space." I heard the ice in the water glasses tinkling. A violinist stop mid-phrase. A cousin cough into his fist. No one moved. No one helped the old widow without her glasses, bent in a glittering haze, patting the floor for the thin frames that let the room make sense. When I found them, one lens was cracked like a spider web. I set them on my nose anyway and blinked through two versions of the same scene, my son staring at the floor, and the woman he had married looking at me as if I were a locked door she had every right to break. "You are not welcome in our new life," Vanessa said, smoothing the silk that rippled over her hips. "Michael and I need privacy while we find a better place. Your house is perfect for now." Her voice carried to the raised ceiling and hit the sconces like a small, cold bell. Michael did not look up. He had my late husband's shoulders and my father's careful hands. And somehow neither trait had taught him what to do with himself in this moment. I could have forgiven his silence if it had been fear. What I heard in it was agreement. I stood. The ballroom smelled of peonies and sugared vanilla. The chandeliers threw soft light over faces that turned away from me in polite discomfort. Someone whispered that I should be in a senior residence where people could watch me. Someone else wondered aloud if I might be confused. The words felt like chalk dust in the back of my throat. "My name is Eleanor Carter. I am 70 years old. I read receipts twice and rinse jam jars for reuse. 3 mornings a week, I ring up first editions and chip teacups at a tiny antique bookstore off a 2-lane road outside Wimberley. I drive a sedan with a tape deck and keep a cardigan folded in the back seat for cold theaters. People see all of that and decide the rest. That has always suited me. Vanessa did not know me. She knew a version I let the world hold. She knew elastic waistbands, a garden with tomatoes, a widow who kept to herself. She did not know the paper-thin envelope in the back of my dresser, or the man I trusted with names and numbers and signatures, or the promise Daniel made to me the winter before he died. Invisible wealth is a shield. Ellie, do not let anyone talk you out of it. I wiped my cheek with a napkin and walked toward the exit as if I had gone for air. Past the cake. Past the photographer lowering his camera. Past a bouquet toss that would not happen. Outside. The evening was soft and warm. The kind of Austin night that carries music from a block away. I sat in the front seat of my car, turned the key for the air, and took the phone from my bag. "Thomas," I said when he answered. "It is Eleanor. Come to the Hillcrest ballroom. Bring the envelope from the lockbox and the copies you made." He asked me if I was sure. "Yes," I said, and heard my voice steady itself. It is time. 2 years earlier, on a bright Sunday afternoon, Michael had arrived at my doorstep in San Antonio with the grin that belonged to the boy I once raised. The one who used to surprise me with wildflower bouquets plucked from the roadside. "Mom," he said, "there is someone I want you to meet." Behind him stood Vanessa. Perfect hair that curled in deliberate waves. A dress that cost more than I made in a week at the bookstore. A perfume that lingered in the doorway long after she walked in. Her eyes moved quickly, scanning the narrow hall, the sagging couch, the wall lined with books that Daniel and I had collected over 40 years. "How cozy," she murmured, lips pressed into what might have been a smile. But the tone was wrong. It carried a sharpness like a knife hidden in silk. We sat down for dinner at my small oak table. I had made roast chicken and cornbread, the kind of meal Michael had always loved. Vanessa poked at the chicken, lifting the skin with her fork as if she were examining a lab specimen. "I am watching my figure," she explained, pushing her plate away after 2 bites. When I asked about her family, she answered with a vague hand wave. "Oh, they do real estate. Some business in Houston. Nothing interesting." But then she leaned forward, eyes bright. "And you, Eleanor? Do you manage okay on a widow's pension? It must be difficult." I remember Michael frowning at her tone, then softening when she slipped her hand into his. I smiled politely, saying I managed well enough. In that moment, I began to catalog her, the way I had cataloged rare books for decades, the fine leather binding, the gold-pressed lettering, and the pages already curling with rot. The weeks that followed confirmed my instincts. Each visit carried a small insult wrapped in kindness. "Eleanor, you deserve more modern clothes," she said once, her gaze lingering on the cardigan I wore to the bookstore. "That car of yours is a relic," she remarked another time. "It is dangerous for a woman your age to drive something so old." Always for your own good. Always with Michael nodding as though her words were gospel. One afternoon, while Michael stepped into the bathroom, I heard Vanessa's voice drift from my kitchen. "Yes, Mom," she was saying softly. "The house is in a prime spot, worth a fortune if she sells. If I can convince her to downsize, we can move in before we buy our own place. She is naive. She will probably even thank us." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands gripping a tea towel. When she came back, she smiled, asked about the roses on the balcony, and kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. I said nothing. Not then. But I knew. From that moment on, our meetings became theater. She played the caring daughter-in-law, concerned for the old widow's comfort. I played the fragile woman grateful for her interest. Inside, I was studying her every move, learning her strategies, preparing my defenses. It was like watching a chess opponent arrange pawns, believing I had no pieces of my own. That was the first warning. The moment I realized Vanessa did not see me as family. She saw me as property, and my son was her willing accomplice. It began with suggestions whispered over dinner, the kind that sounded helpful if you didn't listen too closely. Eleanor. I saw a beautiful retirement community just outside New Braunfels. Vanessa said one evening, flipping through a glossy brochure she had tucked in her purse. Everything included. Housekeeping, meals, even a shuttle bus. Imagine how much easier life would be for you. Michael nodded, his fork moving absently over his plate. She is just worried. Mom, you should at least think about it. I smiled, folded the brochure neatly, and placed it in a drawer. That drawer soon filled with more. Communities for seniors. Articles about safety risks of living alone. Magazines open to stories of widows who downsized. The message was constant, unrelenting. You are old. You cannot manage. You need us. By the winter before their engagement, the pressure turned heavier. One evening, they brought Vanessa's parents with them. We only want what's best for you. Mrs. Carter, her father said, his eyes sweeping across the living room like an appraiser. At your age, it is reckless to keep up such a large property alone. Michael sat there nodding, his hand resting on Vanessa's knee. Mom, he said, don't you think it would be nice to live somewhere safer, somewhere people could look after you? Something inside me went cold. They were no longer pretending this was about me. They were preparing their case, rehearsing their lines as though I were already on trial. After they left, I stood at my kitchen sink, staring at the shadow of the oak tree across the yard. That house was more than walls and windows. Daniel and I had built our lives there, brick by brick, moment by moment. To them, it was square footage. To me, it was memory, love, and grief stitched into the very beams. That night, I called Thomas. He had been Daniel's attorney, a man with a sharp mind and a loyalty I trusted like few others. Thomas, I said, lowering my voice, though I was alone. I need you to look into Vanessa Dawson. Everything. Her debts, her work, her family. And Michael, too. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked. I stared at the drawer, stuffed with brochures. The false smiles, the whispers about incompetence. Yes, I answered. I have to know who I am really up against. The next morning, I folded laundry at the kitchen table, pretending life was ordinary. But inside, I felt something shift. The game they thought they were playing, I had just chosen to play it too. Only I had a different set of rules. And unlike them, I knew patience could be a weapon. 3 weeks later, Thomas arrived at my bookstore just as I was stacking a box of old poetry volumes. He carried a slim leather folder tucked under his arm, his face grave. We need to talk. Eleanor, he said quietly, guiding me into the tiny back office that smelled of paper and dust. Inside, He spread the documents across the desk. The truth hit me like a sudden chill. Michael and Vanessa were drowning in debt. Their Austin apartment was 3 months behind on rent. Credit cards maxed out. 2 luxury cars, both leased, consuming most of their combined income. And then came the wedding. $48,000 in expenses already on borrowed credit, with more contracts signed in Vanessa's name. A house of cards waiting for the faintest breath. But the cruelest page was the last. A record of inquiries Michael himself had made with local banks, questions about loans against an elderly parent's home. Worse, Thomas added grimly. He spoke to a lawyer about procedures for gaining financial power of attorney. My heart stuttered. My son, my only child, had been planning to strip me of my independence under the guise of concern. The image of him, the boy who once built me a Mother's Day birdhouse with his bare hands, dissolved into the man who now sat silent while his wife pushed me toward the door of my own life. I traced the columns of numbers with shaking fingers. It was no longer just Vanessa's ambition. Michael was fully complicit. Thomas rested his hand on mine. Eleanor, I know this is painful, but knowledge is power. They think you are vulnerable. They have no idea you are prepared. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the storm in my chest. All these months, I had allowed myself to believe Michael was simply blinded by love, manipulated by Vanessa's sharp tongue. But here it was, in black ink, his own betrayal. That night, I sat alone in my living room, the clock ticking loud in the silence. I remembered Daniel's words, "Invisible wealth is a shield." He had been right. For years, I believed I was shielding our family from envy. Now I saw the truth. I had been shielding myself from the people I loved most. The realization burned, but it also lit something fierce inside me. I could no longer pretend. I could no longer hope Michael would come back to the boy he once was. The evidence lay before me, undeniable. My son and his bride-to-be were not building a marriage. They were constructing a trap, and I was the prize they thought already belonged to them. The night before the wedding, the phone rang just as I was setting down a framed photograph of Daniel on the mantel. Michael's number glowed on the screen. For a moment, I let it ring, my pulse steady. Before I answered, "Mom," he began, his voice soft, careful, as if he were talking to a stranger he wanted to keep from hanging up. "Tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle like stones in a pond. Difficult. That was the word he used for my refusal to hand over the home Daniel and I had built. Difficult. As though I were a stubborn child, not his mother. "Vanessa just wants what's best for us," he added quickly. "She's thinking of the future. Our children. You should be proud." Pride. I glanced at Daniel's photograph, his smile frozen in time, his hands resting on my shoulders the day we bought the house. He would not have called me difficult. He would not have let another person erase me. Michael, I said slowly, tomorrow is your wedding. You should focus on celebrating with your bride. But let me make one thing clear. You will not pressure me again about the house. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Silence filled the line. Then came the sigh, heavy and resigned. I thought you'd understand. The call ended without good night. I sank into Daniel's old armchair, the fabric worn where his shoulders used to rest. I pulled the photograph back into my lap, tracing the edge of the frame with trembling fingers. For years, I had protected Michael, even when he stumbled, even when he chose poorly. I paid debts he never knew I covered. I kept secrets he never asked about. And still, he had chosen to betray me. That night, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside lay the folder Thomas had prepared: bank statements, property deeds, investment records, proof of everything I had built with Daniel, proof of the shield we had forged in silence. I spread the documents across the quilt, the moonlight through the curtains falling over numbers and signatures. For so long, these papers had been my safety net, my private guard against a world that could be cruel. Now, they were something else. They were weapons. Invisible wealth is the strongest shield, Daniel had told me once. But a shield can also become a blade. Tomorrow, in front of everyone, they would learn that lesson. And when they did, they would never again mistake my silence for weakness. The moment I stepped back into the Hillcrest ballroom, every conversation died as though someone had cut the power. Crystal chandeliers glowed above tables, set with roses and gold chargers. But the atmosphere had shifted. Guests leaned forward, their eyes following me as if I had carried a storm in with me. At my side walked Thomas Reyes, his suit impeccable, his leather briefcase tucked under his arm like a judge's gavel. His presence alone stirred whispers. People in this city knew him attorney, advisor, the man families called when the stakes were highest. Vanessa spun around, her veil fluttering as she hissed across the dance floor. "What are you doing here again? Eleanor, you left once." "Isn't that enough drama?" I didn't answer. I only looked at her, then at my son, who stood behind her with his bow tie askew and his face pale. Thomas cleared his throat, his voice cutting clean through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive this interruption, but I have urgent matters to address with Mr. Ratter. Michael Carter and his wife, Vanessa Dawson." A murmur rippled across the room. Guests craned their necks, phones slipping into hands, recording without shame. They sensed history was about to be written on that parquet floor. Thomas drew out the first document. Effective immediately. The financial guarantees. Mrs. Eleanor Carter provided for your Austin lease have been revoked. Your landlord will be notified in the morning. You have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate. Color drained from Michael's face. "Lease guarantee?" he whispered, his lips barely moving. Vanessa's laughter cracked like glass. "What nonsense! She doesn't have money to guarantee anything. Look at her. Look at her car. She works in a dusty shop. She's nothing. Thomas' eyes flashed. Appearances can deceive. He lifted the second page. The monthly transfers of $4,500, which have supported your credit card payments, car insurance, and living expenses for the past 3 years, are terminated. Permanently. Gasps broke out around the tables. I saw heads bend together, mouths covered in disbelief. Vanessa staggered, clutching her skirts. Impossible. That money was from bonuses. Refunds. You're lying! Michael's hands shook as he grabbed at my sleeve. Mom, is this true? All this time it was you? I met his eyes. Steady now. Unflinching. Yes. Michael. For 3 years I carried your debts while you mocked my life. Thomas raised his voice for the final blow. And the payment guarantee for this wedding reception, the food, the music. The ballroom has also been rescinded. The management will demand full payment tonight before guests may leave. The room erupted in chaos. Murmurs. Gasps. Footsteps shifting toward the doors. Vanessa's scream pierced the confusion. You can't do this. You're ruining everything. No, I said at last, my voice calm against her shrillness. I am not ruining anything. I am revealing the truth. And in that truth, their perfect facade began to shatter. The ballroom pulsed with the uneasy shuffle of guests, whispers running like wildfire from table to table. Some held their phones high, the red lights of recording screens glinting off champagne flutes. Vanessa clutched Michael's arm, her veil sliding off one shoulder as she shrieked, "You're lying. She has nothing. She's an old widow with a second-hand purse." Stop this circus! Thomas did not flinch. He drew another sheet from his briefcase and held it where the front rows could see. Over the last 36 months, Mrs. Darius. Carter transferred a total of $175,000 into accounts belonging to Michael Carter and Vanessa Dawson. This sum included rental payments, credit card debts, and insurance coverage. A sharp gasp swept through the hall. One guest muttered, "That's more than most people make in 2 years." Another shook his head. Phone still recording. Michael's knees buckled, and he gripped the edge of a chair. "Mom, you did all that? Why?" "Because I thought you would remember who you were," I answered softly, the words trembling out of me. "Because I thought love was enough." But Thomas was not finished. He pulled out a final envelope, his voice steady and merciless. "Effective this week. Mrs. Carter has amended her will. All properties, investments, and accounts once intended for her son will now be transferred upon her death to charitable organizations dedicated to protecting senior citizens from financial exploitation." The words landed like a thunderclap. Vanessa staggered back as though struck. "No," she screamed, her voice cracking. "You can't disinherit Michael. He's your only child. We're your family. I stepped forward, my voice carrying in the silence. Family does not plot to have you declared incompetent. Family does not bring appraisers to your home behind your back. Family does not slap you across the face in front of strangers. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an ally. But all she found were faces turned away, faces filled with contempt or pity. Her own parents sat frozen at their table, their expressions hardening as they realized the scheme they had encouraged had just collapsed in public. Michael tried once more, his voice breaking like a boy's. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't destroy my life. I looked at him and saw both the child who had once fallen asleep on my shoulder and the man who had allowed greed to hollow him out. Destroy your life? No. Michael, you destroyed it the moment you chose her ambition over my dignity. The silence was absolute. Then, somewhere in the back, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then spreading like a wave. Guests clapped, some nodding, others whispering words I could not hear but felt in my bones. Vanessa collapsed onto a chair, sobbing into her hands. Her wedding dress crumpled around her like wilted petals. Michael stood over her, his face ashen, his eyes wide with the horror of a man who finally sees the cost of his choices. And in that instant, with the truth laid bare under golden chandeliers, I understood I had not lost everything. I had reclaimed myself. 3 days later, the Hillcrest Ballroom was still echoing in the town's gossip. Videos of the confrontation had gone viral, spreading beyond Austin to every corner of Texas. Strangers stopped me at the bookstore, pressing my hands, whispering, "You gave us courage." Others shared their own stories, sons who drained savings accounts, daughters-in-law who pressured for house deeds. I was no longer just Eleanor Carter, the quiet widow. I had become a mirror for thousands who had stayed silent too long. Meanwhile, Michael and Vanessa's world collapsed in on itself. Their landlord served them with eviction papers. Creditors called morning to night. The ballroom filed suit to recover the unpaid $52,000 for the wedding. Vanessa's image consulting business, something she had bragged about, vanished overnight. Who would trust an expert whose humiliation had become a trending video? Thomas visited my apartment the following week with updates. "They are staying with Vanessa's parents," he said, "though the arrangement is strained. From what I hear, even her parents regret how far they pushed this." I nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and inevitability. I had not wanted to destroy them. I had wanted to save myself. The distinction mattered, even if they could not see it. 2 months later, I launched the Carter Foundation for Senior Dignity. With Thomas' help and the encouragement of my niece Clara, we built a nonprofit that offered legal aid and counseling for older adults being pressured by their families. I donated a portion of my investments, not out of spite, but out of purpose. Each case we took on was another life pulled back from the brink of exploitation. The work gave me a new rhythm. Mornings were filled with meetings, afternoons with calls from frightened seniors who whispered their stories as though someone might overhear. Evenings, I returned to my bookstore job because I still loved the smell of old paper and the quiet of arranging shelves. Life had become both larger and simpler. 2 years passed. One spring morning, I stood at a podium in Dallas before lawmakers, presenting testimony for stronger protections against elder financial abuse. My voice was steady as I spoke of hidden manipulation, of the slow erosion of dignity, of the need for laws that recognized the subtle violence of greed. Cameras flashed, and somewhere in the crowd, Clara smiled at me with pride. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, looking at the house Vanessa had once tried to claim. Its walls glowed golden in the sunset, not because of money or power, but because it was still mine, filled with Daniel's memory and my own hard-won peace. The lesson was carved deep into me. Kindness without boundaries invites exploitation. Silence can look like weakness, but truth, once spoken, carries a force no one can erase. Family is not defined by blood or marriage vows. It is defined by respect, by honesty, and by love that does not demand the sacrifice of your dignity. And, as the Texas night settled around me, I whispered to myself what I wished Michael had remembered. True loyalty is not measured by what you take from someone, but by how fiercely you protect them. In the quiet after everything, I finally understood the meaning of my own story. For too long, I let silence cover their disrespect, believing that love meant sacrifice without limit. That night in the ballroom, when Vanessa struck me and my son stood by, I realized love without boundaries is not love at all. It is surrender. I chose to step into the light, to reveal the truth I had hidden. And in doing so, I reclaimed more than money or property. I reclaimed myself. What I built afterward, the Carter Foundation, the voices we raised, the lives we saved, proved that pain can become purpose if we dare to speak. My greatest lesson is this: kindness must always walk hand in hand with self-respect. No one, not even family, has the right to strip you of dignity. And at any age, it is never too late to stand tall.